Welcome, guys, back to another episode of Ameer Approved. Today's special guest is Jonathan Pageau. He's a professional artist, writer, and public speaker. He delivers several lectures every year in universities, conferences, and other venues around North America. Now, originally, where I first discovered Jonathan was through Jordan Peterson. And they were talking about symbolism, mythology, and I've been studying mythology for a long time, studying, Arthur Schopenhauer, Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung. I've always been fascinated by that. And I dived into your work, and I was looking at your take on symbolism. And my first question to you, Jonathan, is what was your initial catalyst that got you interested in this whole world of symbolism?
Was mostly I grew up as a Christian, and I grew up in a let's say type of Christianity that's leaning more towards fundamentalism, not totally fundamentalist, but just leaning in that direction. And as my own intellect developed in university years, I became very dissatisfied with the answers that I was getting and the level of interpretation that I was receiving. And so it became like a crisis in my life, where it was either I was going to give up my faith or I was going to something needed to happen. And so in reading the church fathers and in reading ancient texts, I started to see the more profound aspects in the Bible and in the Christian tradition. And that's what kind of launched me into seeing patterns, not just in my own tradition, not just in Christianity, but then, in other stories from myths from other cultures, but then ultimately even in popular culture today.
Yeah, I think people really underestimate the importance of symbology, mythology, and symbolism in general, how they create narratives and structures in the human mind. So, can we kind of summarize in your words, like pretend somebody's listening to this, and let's say they're like, I don't know, we'll say both camps. Like for me, let's kind of I'll come in my perspective. I'm fundamentally against capital R religion as an institution, but fundamentally promote religion as an underscore R, so self-individual religion. So let's call it spirituality, right? So
Right.
figure it out, right? The whole institution of you got to follow my way or the highway. I'm like,
You don't like that.
I don't go with that, and so whatsoever. And so let's take it towards that direction, because for the most part, most people in modern day society, they'll say they're not religious in a conversation. However, in reality, they are following religious doctrines.
Yeah.
So they may tell you they're not religious, but that's not really the truth. So somebody's listening that's, in a nutshell, what's the selling point? Like, why should they care about symbols?
Well, the idea is, as we kind of reach the end of, we had a period in human history now, let's say from the 17th century, kind of ramping up this idea that science was going to save us, that science was going to solve all our problems, that materialism was the solution. And now we're kind of reaching the end of that, whereas science is starting to science left something out for the whole time, left the idea of consciousness just out of the picture, didn't talk about it as if it didn't exist, looking through consciousness, but not looking back at it. And now we're reaching the end of it, where all of a sudden we realize, oh, this whole consciousness thing, this whole idea of a conscious agent, all of these problems, we haven't dealt with it. So now we have to go back and deal with it. And in turning the lens of science back on consciousness, all of a sudden things started to get very loopy and things started to get very strange. And so this is the place where all of a sudden a lot of people now I'm seeing through Jordan Peterson and other thinkers as well are realizing, oh, wait a minute, these stories, these structures, they're not just these arbitrary things that people have been telling for the past millennia, but they're actually patterns by which we are able to engage with the world. Science will tell you now, like, there's just too much stuff out there. There are too many things. There's an unlimited amount of detail in every single movement, every single thing that you do. The question is, why do we focus on certain things? Why do we put our attention on certain things? So when we tell the story, we have to take some events in the world and we have to string them up in a certain order for them to sound like a story. In order to realize that, you can think that every time you hear a story, imagine that there's also every blade of grass is moving in that story. Every piece of cloth is slightly shifting in that story, but we don't talk about that because it's not meaningful. So the question is, what is meaningful and how does meaning appear? And that's when the patterns of storytelling start to make sense, because we realize that as conscious agents, we have to organize this unlimited amount of facts into patterns. And these patterns are not arbitrary. They're not up to our own, individual whims, but they're the very manner in which we engage the world. They're the manner also in which we recognize communities. We recognize unity in terms of cities or nations, in terms of stories, in terms of what makes something related to something in the past. Like, why do you think that you have something in common with your grandfather? You have, like, in terms of where's that? What's the story? What relates you to that? And it's these stories of these patterns of storytelling, which is what symbolism, at least the way that I approach symbolism, is looking at.
Do you think people have, though, like a negative connotation when it comes to symbolism?
I think so. I think it's also because we have this sense that symbolism is a kind of allegorical thing where you arbitrarily attribute meaning to something, it's kind of like this. It's kind of like the green light means go and the red light means stop. And we think it's just this arbitrary thing that we just decided that green light means go and red light means stop. And that's the symbolism. But in actuality, real symbolism is coherent. It's the pattern of reality, and even green light means go and red light means stop is not totally arbitrary. It does have something to do with, especially with red, in terms of how we perceive red and what red tends to mean to us. It's like there's a reason why poisonous fruits are red. It's not arbitrary. There are patterns to these things.
I think also people, they tend to be too dogmatic, meaning they attach the absolute to a symbol, but they're not delineating the difference between the message and the physical symbol itself.
Well, what my approach to symbolism is to understand that the relationship between meaning and the instantiation of meaning, or the symbol, is an actual example of that which it represents. So it's not, like I said, it's not arbitrary. So we need the instantiations. We can't just access the abstract symbols. So a good example that I always give is that, let's say, the image of center and periphery. So every culture, every space has a center, something which defines it, and then it has a place where it stops being what it is. It could be a mall, it could be a church, it could be anything, a house. There's something which makes it something, and then but that something which makes it something isn't arbitrary. If it's a house, then the idea that it's a home of a family or a person, that is not an arbitrary thing. So the symbolism, let's say the symbolism of home, the house is an instantiation of that symbolism. It's not arbitrary. You couldn't attach the same symbolism to a potato. Like, you just can't. It actually connects in that sense. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, like for me, when I look at symbolism or I look at mythology, I like try to rewind back in time. So like most people, when they're talking about symbolism today or mythology, they're still predating to the Abrahamic religion. So let's say like Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Pretty simple. I want to say similar, but they all share narratives and stories. There's a resemblance among that. To me, when I study history, I'm like, that's just a blimp. That's just happened a couple of thousand years ago. We as a society, or let's say as a civilization or a species, we've been here for a very long time. And obviously a lot of these symbols and experiences that we have came from when we were early stage humans, hunting and gathering, experiencing nature. And so I always find it curious of like there has to be an evolutionary process where a lot of the modern day symbols and stories that we have originate from the time when we were hunters and gatherers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it is very useful in terms of symbolism to try to strip back a lot of our society, like it's strip back a lot of the technology, a lot of the modern perceptions in order to get to the core thing. An example that I always give is the idea of the sun. Let's say if you try to understand the sun in terms of modern science and in terms of modern cosmology, you're never going to understand the symbolism of the sun. You have to imagine yourself in a world that's dark, and then all of a sudden this thing comes up from the east and illumines the sky, and then the days get longer and the days get shorter, and there's this whole pattern of manifestation of light in the world. That's how you're right. You do have to strip away a lot of the modernity in order to be able to get to the kind of primal experience of what the symbolism.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Like if we look at symbolism in a nutshell, symbolism tries to create a narrative and a story to explain something in a compact data bit. There's a saying, a picture says 1,000 words,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think the sun's a great example. right? Specifically for people north of the equator, right? So symbolism changes depending on the
Oh yeah,
longitude.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so north of the equator, we're like, well, fuck, we get winter, man. So sun is really holy to us. It's very important to us, especially once we evolved past hunting and gathering. We went to the agricultural society, and so the sun was even more important to us at that point. And so I think people need to understand that symbols, they're here from the get-go, from human civilization. They were used as modern day science to maybe explain a certain phenomenon or crises or some type of event that was happening within that current environment, to maybe dictate or guide that tribe or community into more, I want to say, safer place, or maybe more of a structure type of society as opposed to chaotic one.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you could say it that way, but it's even more primal than that. It's like, let's say we take the sun. Well, the
Yes.
sun is the main source of light in our world. It's the source of light. Everything else is 10 times less than the sun. You can light a fire in your house, but it's nothing like the sun. And so then it's inevitable that everything that's related to light, everything that's related to seeing, to things being available to you rather than being hidden from you, the world being clear rather than being muddled, all this imagery of clear, and so it even takes on an intellectual version where it's like, when you have clear thoughts, then it's clear. The reason why we use the word clear, it has to do with light, has to do with, so the analogies are not, they're real, and they're based on this kind of primal experience of the sun, which is giving you light. And so it goes even more, like, to me, it goes even further than trying to understand the historical. I always tell people the best way to do it is not so much to try to kind of imagine the historical contingency of our ancestors, because we can't really do that. A lot of it is just conjecture. But if you actually imagine just yourself out in the woods and the sun comes up after you spent a dark night alone in the woods, then you can understand what the meaning of the sun is, because everything becomes clear. You don't bump your knee anymore. You don't, things don't have these ominous shapes around you. Everything becomes clear. So that's the exercise I always tell people, is to try to kind of to come to the phenomenological experience of something as much as possible, to be able to grasp the symbolism.
Yeah, and so, like, continuing on our talk about that, for me, I think a lot of people have this question, is like, how can I better understand symbolism today? And B, why, like, how does that pertain to my, let's say, spiritual or religious belief system?
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to say that I think that the best way today to understand symbolism is just still to look at our religious traditions. I don't see that there's anything that has replaced it. People have tried in the like you talked about Jung before, modern people have tried to kind of create secular versions of these symbolic structures. But in the end, they're not as profound as the actual participative realities that the religious traditions have. And so, if you want to understand the heart, let's say, symbolism of the center, of your own center, then, to look at the architecture of a church, or even the architecture of a mosque, or even the architecture of any temple, of any sacred space, has a similar structure with like an inner part and then different outer parts that come, and the inner part is hidden, and only a few people are allowed. And then, as you get further out, you have more and more people. So you can understand your own self in analogy to these structures. And I think really, I do think that it's still the best way to go about it. Even though I know you said you don't like the capital R religions. One of the reasons why, let me give my pitch for the capital R religions. Okay. So one of the reasons why we need,
I'm a libertarian, so everything goes.
All right. One of the reasons why we need the capital R religion is because there's a way in which this symbolic structure has to scale up for it to be real. Okay. So if you say it just applies to me, to my own self, then you run into a problem, because the structure of your person, let's say, is, if you, in the symbolic thinking, the structure of your person can be found also in the structure of a family, can be found also in the structure of a nation, can be found also in any communal thing. Anything that is both one and many will have the same structure as yourself. And so the symbolism has to scale up. So if you say, I just want a kind of individual spirituality, you're going to run into a problem, which is at some point your society is going to fragment. And what's one of the things that we're seeing happen in the West is that as we moved away from the central traditions, the society starts to fragment because there's nothing bringing us together. There's no common vision, which is making us one, making us something.
I'm actually gonna agree on that, but I'm also gonna push back and say I don't think so. We're ever meant to be one.
Well, we are supposed to be one in many, because if we're just many, then we fight.
Yeah, so like I look at tribes, right? You had different mythologies and different viewpoints and different behaviors and different epigenetic expressions depending on the circumstances. Like the jungle tribes of the Amazonians versus the northern Aborigines of Canada versus, let's say, Sahara, or not Sahara, the Bedouins in Middle East, right? They have very different cultural identity and belief systems, and they wouldn't kind of mix together. And so I do agree on your aspect of hierarchical. Like, let's say on my individual belief system, I believe in X, certain symbolism. Well, if this X needs to go higher if it needs to evolve higher in the hierarchy, meaning if I take my personal belief system, then I apply it to my community, it needs to benefit them too. Beyond my community, it needs to benefit, let's say, I don't know, my province. Okay.
Yeah.
Beyond my province, it needs to benefit my nation, right?
Yeah.
Give or take. That I agree. Like, there has to be your belief system needs to benefit other human beings. It can't be like, well, my belief over your belief system, go fuck yourself.
Yeah. But even in terms of tribe, like the thing in terms of a tribe is that you have that structure of unity at the level of the tribe. So you can't avoid it. It just depends at what level you're going to put it. Now, the problem of keeping the level of unity at the level of the tribe is, it's tribal life. It's that you constantly being rated, constantly rating other people for the women, constantly rating them for the resources. You see the other as complete, as almost like as a demon that you can kill, that you can do whatever you want to. And so there's the world kind of, sometimes there's an uneasy balance which ends up being set up, between, let's say, the sedentary tribes and the nomadic tribes. But most of the time, it just ends up being constant fear and conflict. And so some of the let's say the monotheistic religions, one of the things they try to do, especially Islam and Christianity, is to try to say, can we scale that up? Like, how high can we scale that up without destroying the commonality, the common tribe? And so, because that's one of the problems of, let's say, the empire, is that it can suck up all the tribes into one thing. That's what we saw in the modern age, right? Communism, Nazism, all of that was insane. Like, because it would just try to suck everything up into one thing, and then you have a crazy monster. But in the Christian vision, like the traditional Christian vision, there's this idea that there's a balance between our unity and our multiplicity. That you're allowed to be Armenian, or you're allowed to be Greek or Bulgarian or whatever, but there is this thing that we also have in common, which makes it so that we have a certain amount of communion together, and we're not completely ripping each other apart. And you see similar things in Islam too. Like Islam, also tends to leave way like, let's say, local customs and stuff, and not kind of bother local customs so much.
Islam did one good thing that the Roman Catholics took away had originally. Islam kept Arabic as a unity language.
Yeah. And the Catholic Church had Latin, the Orthodox Church had Greek as its kind of main thing. And that, the common language is a big part of just trying to find a way for people to remain together.
It wasn't too long ago, you used to go to mass and then it will be spoken in Latin. Right. So there's a common unity. Depending if you're traveling or meeting somebody, you have this common denominator of a language they can speak to. Yeah.
Well, one of the problems that happened in the Catholic Church is that the problem with this, in terms of symbolism and structure, like let's say the basic structure, where you kind of look at it, the problem of one in many, let's say, like that structure is one of the most primal symbolic structures. Now, the difficulty is that how hard do you pull on one side, or how hard do you pull on the other? And so in the modern age, from the Baroque, like the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Church pulled really hard on centralization, pulled super hard. It's like everything has to be in Latin. everybody has to kind of bow to the Pope. So this like massive centralization. But when you go to like Indonesia or Vietnam or whatever, at some point your Latin starts to not make a lot of sense anymore. It makes sense in Western Europe because everybody has a kind of common culture, like this common European thing. But when you're out in the middle of nowhere, like it doesn't mean anything. So you're pulling. And then what happened is that the opposite happened. It broke apart. And now it's like anything goes in the Catholic Church and it's all chaos. And it's like they couldn't find that balance between having a central identity or central language and at least lower in the hierarchy somewhere to leave room for people to have their local customs and stuff.
Yeah, but I think Joseph Campbell said it well too in the past. Was he didn't necessarily have a problem with religion. He had the problem with how religion wasn't updating its belief system for modern times. So you got to look at things in context. You have, whether it's the Quran, whether it's the Bible, whether it's the Torah, written thousands of years ago, specifically the Bible, written by many people hundreds of years ago after Jesus was crucified. And so you have these certain rules or ideological belief systems that might have been beneficial 2,000 years ago, but we're talking about 2020. Now, we're not saying rewrite the religion. We're not going to, we're not going against your faith, but what we're saying is like, for you to have a mythology and a narrative that's beneficial for people, you need to update it with current times.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that religion has always done that. It just always has. One of the reasons why people don't realize that it has is that a lot of it happened in the informal. Like a lot of it happened in the can I say this, in the actual practice of the traditions. We have a weird way of thinking today, which is, you have this, it's almost like a computer program way of thinking, where it's like you have a program and the program runs and there's no difference between the program and how it runs. That's not how religions work. Religions don't work that way. Religions have basic patterns. And then as they play out, they adapt to the situation that they're in. You don't change the patterns, but then the way that they manifest themselves ends up being slightly different depending on the situation, as you said. And that's something that really, honestly, the idea that that's not happening is a very modern phenomena, and you see it in kind of fundamentalist Christianity. You see it in kind of Wahhabi Islam. It's kind of crazy, but that has never been traditional Christianity. You don't see that. Traditional religions always have this ebb and flow. Sometimes it gets too wild and there's a bit of a pull to kind of make things straighter. But then it's never like the idea of the Gestapo that comes into your house, or the Inquisition, that somehow the Inquisition was something like, the secret police, the KGB secret police that came to get you. That never was the case. It's a modern phenomenon that doesn't exist in the ancient world.
Yeah, like things like baffle me. I don't know. It was a while ago, but like one of the popes was condoning condoms in Africa. You remember that?
Well, the Catholic Church has had a strict stance on contraception.
Like, come on, like, are you like, you're telling me you're not going to recommend condoms? You know, fucking HIV and sexually transmitted diseases are happening in Africa. Like stuff like this is like, why not recommend it? Like, I just don't get. It's for the betterment of like everybody.
Well, okay, so let's take your example and break it down. Like, let's take your example and break it down. Let's say that I say, so the thing is that you can't isolate effects of things. So you can say, I want to encourage people in Africa to use condoms because I don't want them to get HIV. And it's like, that's a good idea. Like, to say you don't want people to get HIV. Of course, who wants people to get HIV? And so you say, so let's encourage condoms in Africa. Now, it's kind of like if you said something like, I would like to introduce the car into North America because I really want the car to help people move faster and see their friends and all. It's great. But what I don't want society to fragment, and I don't want malls, community to be completely separate, and then people to drive to shop and to drive to go everywhere, and then people don't know their neighbors, and they drive 20 minutes everywhere they go, and there's no community anymore. It's like, I don't want that, but you can't get one without the other. If you introduce the car into society, you get the fragmentation of culture. If you introduce contraception, then you get our world. You get sexuality completely divorced from having children, and then everything goes kind of wacky, and then people don't stay in their families, people get divorced, people remarried, kids are messed up, like the and then society breaks down. So that's the problem with like, and so the thing about in a traditional way of seeing it would be to say we condone, we condemn the use of condoms, and then not, how can I say this? Not make a big deal out of it when people use them. It's kind of like it's even the same thing like you see in Canada. We can't think that way anymore. We don't think that way. We don't think like, maybe in Canada we could have condemned marijuana, but then stop prosecuting people for it. But it's like, because we have this weird program thinking where we think the program has to run all the way through. We can't let it kind of slightly change as it moves. We're like, no, we have to legalize it. We have to legalize it completely. And then we think, well, that's not going to have any side effects, right? That's not going to have any side effects. And then a year later, now they want to up the age to 21. And you're going to see it in a few years. They're going to want to up it up to 25 because it's causing massive chaos in society. It's like,
well, in fairness, if alcohol was discovered today by their standards from the Drug Administration,
probably
not probably, it's truth, it would be illegal. You would not be allowed to. This is by their standards.
I mean, and it's like, I'm not against the legalization of marijuana. To be honest, it doesn't bother me. But what the example I'm using is mostly to say that this is one of the things that symbolism helps you to see. Actually, is to see how if you have a pattern of behaviors and a pattern of manifestation, you can't isolate what it's going to do.
I agree. There's
things are going to play out, and so we have to be able. If you see the pattern properly, then you can understand let's say the greater ramifications of something, and not just see the thing you want it to do. Right? I don't know if that makes sense.
Like, I like to use like rational thinking. I like to figure out first order thinking, second order thinking, and it's not always set in stone. You can't always execute on it, but it's at least it's a good thought experiment on different topics you have. Like, for example, with the condom, it's like, okay, let's say the Pope did say, yes, I recommend using condoms. Now, they might have changed their stance. This was a couple of years ago, so I don't know their current stance.
No, they can't recommend the use of condoms. Okay, the Catholic Church can't. They can't. Okay.
So
if they do that, then they're just not the Catholic Church anymore.
Okay. So they can't.
No.
And so let's say hypothetically they did, in this scenario. And you mentioned splintering or segmentations of certain ideological belief systems in Africa. And Africa is a huge continent. So you have Northern Africa is very different than Southern Africa is very different than Central Africa. You have all these different types of ethnicity, different religions, different history, etc. So it's very hard to just group Africa as an Africa.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
And so it's like, okay, they say yes, be like, oh, cool. I'm Roman Catholic in this case. The Vatican Pope said, cool, condoms, I'm going to use condoms. And it's or the guy would say that. It's interesting to see if this would actually play out in a negative. It's like, okay, people are using net utility. Maybe we do have less HIV. Will this necessarily cause families like it?
Well, we can see in our culture what it did. Yeah. We can look at what contraception did to our culture, like in North America. We can use that as an example. And
but it's very complex. Like, I'll give you an example. So you look at social economic levels. The more money you make, the less kids you want to have.
Yeah.
Number two, beyond just social economic levels, if we're looking at modern society, I'm living in Toronto. You're close somewhere around Montreal. Toronto is fucking expensive to live, central Toronto. Like, as a base family, like, you need about like $150,000 minimum to live downtown Toronto. The average Canadian male across all provinces, across all different types of careers, is about $45,000, right? And so you can't financially live in Toronto, but the majority of opportunities is obviously proximity to major cities. So Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, Edmonton, Alberta. Okay. Good luck raising kids when you're young.
I mean,
today's time, it's different than my parents. No, this is why context matters. Like,
I understand. I don't, it's like, I understand at the same time, in terms of kids, like, I just think it just depends what you want from life. and in raising kids and having kids, it really depends what you want from life. That being poor actually isn't that bad.
No, this is nothing about poor. It's
Well,
about
it is about poor, right? Like if you, a lot of people tell me like, I don't want to have kids because I can't afford them. And it's like, I'm not so sure about that. Like the we can't afford them because we also want to live a certain way.
It's also about the constitutional. I am a firm believer in having a family constitution, sitting down and figuring out what everybody wants. And so being honest with yourself, it's like, okay, we want to live in a certain neighborhood. It doesn't have to be Toronto. It could be anywhere in the world, whatever. You guys decide where you want to live. The reality is, if two parents are working, the child has to be in daycare. At least daycare costs is pretty much a part-time salary. So in Toronto, a good daycare, and obviously you want to send your kids to good daycare. Nobody wants to send their kids to a bad daycare.
Of course.
Right? So a good daycare is like $2,000 a month. Okay, so you're talking about $24,000 a year. That doesn't include anything else. That's just the fee for your child to be there. Now the question is, wait a second, maybe it's cheaper for me to stay home.
Yeah.
Right? Than for me to work, right?
Probably better too.
Yeah, well, obviously it's better.
At least one of you to stay home.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Fuck, 100%. And so then the question is like really figuring out your family constitution is like, well, like this is the realities. This is the financial cost that costs a child, at least one child in this area. Do we want to be killing ourselves and working 40 hours each a week and not saving any money and not really being with our child, only being with our child after 5 o'clock? Or is there better ways to do? I think what most people get stuck into, this also applies to religion. And this is why, I like rational thinking, or like even like Buddhism, or even like Hinduism sometimes, or like even symbolism is like, okay, within this context of religion, whatever religion you are or belief system you are, everybody's doing the same thing. Cool. That's kind of like a template. Your template can't be applied to everybody. It's just a template. That's the word.
Of course.
Template.
Yeah.
You need to figure out within this template what works for you.
Yeah,
I think most people are following just other people.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about what works for you is that one of the problems with that is that you don't know what works for you. It's like people don't know. Like people don't really know what makes them happy. If people knew what made them happy, people wouldn't be drowning in stuff and taking depression pills. Like people drown in stuff and go on vacation, go to Cancun every year, but then are on antidepressants. It's like, I don't think people really know what makes you happy,
because they haven't been. I have a thesis for this, especially
go ahead.
in Western Europe or Western nations. I think for the most part, most people haven't experienced life. Like there's an innate reason why we are human beings, and we're very nomadic. That's why we conquered the world. We're hunters and gatherers by DNA. We're nomadic. This is why we love to travel. This is why we love to experience new things. This is why you can look in deep in literature of science. We literally being in nature, like walking within the forest or being on the beach, makes you healthier. In Japan, they have a saying they call it forest bathing. And so I think if you look at Western Europe or Western nations, it's pretty much ingrained from high school. It's like, okay, Jonathan, you need to get good grades in high school. You need to follow this path. Why? Well, you're going to go to university. Why? Well, you're going to get this piece of paper and then you're going to go work at KPMG or some consulting thing. And why? Well, you're going to get a mortgage. And so your whole life is kind of already set forth, and your parents are pushing you there. And maybe you're part of a church or mosque and telling you, go get your piece of paper and blah, blah, blah. And then you've never paused and asked yourself, well, what have I experienced? I haven't done shit in my life. I've just sat in a classroom, went to college, sat at another desk, and there's my fucking life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pathetic. I mean, that's not life. I mean, I agree with you. Totally agree with you. I think that we have modern kind of delusions about what life is and what brings us true joy and true satisfaction. But I'm not sure that it's just because there's also the experienced hunter who actually isn't any better than the guy who goes and works for KPMG. And that guy who thinks he's going to backpack through Europe for 5 years and, or who does extreme sports, that kind of experience hunting. it also, you know, you look at that 50-year-old experience hunter, you know, that guy, right? He wears linen shirts, and he's got kind of natty hair, and he smokes pot. He smells like patchouli. That guy, like, you don't want to be that guy at 50, man. That guy is not doing super great. So there is, I think you're right. But I mean, I'm going to get all Jordan Peterson on you, but I do think that the idea of taking on responsibility, is actually something which, one of the things, at least as men, for sure, that we find the most satisfactory. Like, to have, you know, that's why, like, one of the problems that, like, people do it in their career. Like, if you take on responsibility in your career, and you have more things that you're in charge of, then you feel that satisfaction. But it's also true in terms of personal life. You know, like, you know, marrying someone, having kids, that is also something which will, it's one of the things, it's so impossible to explain. But if you once you have kids and you do it fully, like, if you're running away, then you're going to be miserable. Like, you're going to, if you have kids but you're running away, you're going to hate it. But if you have kids and you're like, I'm going to jump in this thing, it's the most amazing thing ever. And you can't even explain it to people, because all you do is work. All you do is suffer for your kids, you know. But there's this amazing joy. Like, when my 9-year-old daughter comes and sits on my lap, and I give her a huge hug, and she wants me to read her story, like, that sense of satisfaction is, it's difficult to describe how powerful that is.
I agree, and I'll iterate on this point. Yes, many people do not take responsibility. Now, it goes back to the point that I mentioned. Most people, you know, specifically for, like, the new generation, or I think I was the first in line. I was like I'm 85, so, like, just a first generation millennials, or Intel, I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
Like, and I was the first generation not exposed to social media. Also, I was the last generation not exposed to social media. So I didn't grow up with.
You didn't grow up with, like, a tablet in your hand. Yeah,
Thank
exactly.
fucking God.
Yeah, I know.
No cameras existed when I was younger, or any of that shit. I was a wild child. And so I look at tribes, and I agree with you that healthy family structures is the key to a healthy society. You look at tribes, I look at, like, how they were raised. I look at, if it wasn't for the way that they lived, we wouldn't be here today. I look at certain tribal rituals where there is a transformation, literally in some cases, a transformation from a boy to a man. Classic case people make is that one tribe in Africa where you put your hands within those banana leaves, and they got fire ants in there, and you got to last for like 5 minutes without flinching, right? To show that you're a man. And literally they pass you sometimes a staff or some kind of object that's symbolic of that graduation from boy to man.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen today. This ritual act, for the most part, of a child or a boy graduating a man.
Yeah. Well, you can do it. We did it in our family, both for my son and for my daughter. So it's true that, like, Jews still have bar mitzvahs, which are still very culturally powerful. And, you know, medieval Christianity did have rites of passage in terms of, if you were an apprentice, you know, you would already at 13, 14, you would already be having initiation stages as you move into your field. Or if you were a squire and you were studying to be a knight, then already you would have these kind of rites of passage. And I think that you can do it today. Like, what we did with my son, for example, is we gathered all the men in the family, my father, my uncle, my cousin, people that were around that could come, and we just rented, you know, like, we rented a shack in the woods, and we spent the weekend there. And we just gave my son advice, and gave him, like, a symbolic gift, like a knife, you know, perfect symbolic gift for a 13-year-old. And so I think that it's possible to create these moments even today. But for sure, I'm going to bring you back to the big R religion. It's like the family also has to have something it's looking up to, or else it's also not going to work. You can't have this kind of weird incestuous thing of just the family. It doesn't totally function. Like, the family also has to look up towards something which transcends it. Now, you know, in the modern world, it's been things like nation, or sometimes it has been tribe. But even in tribe, I mean, I think that even in tribes, like the tribes would also have some kind of spiritual reality that they would submit to. Like it wouldn't just be tribe in the modern kind of nationalistic or ethnic sense. It would also kind of be moving up towards something higher, and I think if you need that in order for the lower aspect to cohere, just like you need your mind for your body to have any meaning. Like if you just take care of your body and you don't have a purpose, you're just going to be running around in circles.
But obviously the problem today is no one's following the so-called let's say it for the sake of the conversation, the most simplistic pure form of capital R. Like if people really did follow it to a T.
Oh man, of course. Like it's true. I mean, the reason why the Catholic Church is crumbling, the reason why Christianity is crumbling is Christians' fault. It's not anybody else's fault. It's like our own fault that we're not living up to what Christianity is supposed to be. Like I definitely, that's how I tend to see it. Whatever external force has come to attack Christianity, it only was successful because of the rotten, corruption that existed inside. And I agree. And I think that when you do meet people that have an authentic spiritual path, and an authentic spiritual path that is communal as well, not just the kind of new agey individual part, but really is communal, then you see it in those people, and it, in a way, sometimes it's like even something I don't agree with. Like I can watch like, it's like I really dislike things like Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses, but sometimes like just the fact that they actually take it seriously and they're involved in what they believe, they have this kind of, they can sometimes have a very beautiful coherence, which is there. I don't want to condone Mormonism, but like I said, authenticity definitely is part of the problem in religion today, for sure.
Mormon, is it? Which one is it? Is it Mormon? The ones that
the Mormons, Joseph Smith.
Is that the polygamy one?
Yeah. Well, they're not polygamous anymore. No. I mean, some factions are, but they no. They have Salt Lake City. They have their kind of temple there.
Yeah, I don't know. It's fascinating, man. I think there's always going to be. I think religion is, or we can call it a belief system. Belief system is innately human. It's in our DNA.
But the thing is, it can't just be a belief system. It has to be enacted. Like when we talk about symbolism, it's like you don't believe that putting my hand out and doing this is going to create a communion between you and I. You don't even think about it. You just do it. And then all of a sudden, putting my hand out and doing this suddenly makes a relationship between you. Like, how weird is that? But it has to be enacted, right? It can't just be believed. It has to be participated in. And so our social rituals, like not just the religious ones, but things like knowing how to get in line, like knowing that if you're in a store, like you have to let people out before you go in, like all these rituals that we have that keep our society together, they have to be engaged in and not just thought about or believed in. And then that's what happens with religious rituals as well.
Well, you think only way to get there is through religion?
I think we have to ultimately, we do have to submit to something above us. Now that thing above us can sometimes, if it's too low, it can be dangerous. Like I mentioned about the modern world, is that people tried to replace God with nation. And, and that's what led us to the world wars, because nation became the ultimate thing. And it's like the Italians are going to kick the French's ass, and the Germans are going to get and so it was like this total breakdown.
Nation states won't last. Well, they'll last in our lifetime, but they're the most artificial thing possible. It's the natural ecosystems of humans are city states.
Yeah, I guess. I think, I mean, I agree to a certain extent. Let's say a hierarchy of city states, at least that seemed to be in the way that it worked the best. Like if you think about Rome.
The reason why city states work in the long run.
How do you stop them from fighting?
Let's say. So good
what's
question.
What's your solution to that?
So this is the thing when it comes to anything in life. So There's a famous biological law called Gall's law. No complex organism ever evolved from another complex organism. It evolves from a singular cellular organism and works its way out. You look at nation states, and for the most part, they try to clump everybody together. Classic example of this horrible is where I'm from, is former Yugoslavia. We call it balkanization. Take a bunch of people, throw them together, and magic things will happen. Yeah,
Yeah.
magic things will happen. And so we look at another thing in nature or in science we call Dunbar's number, right? You roughly can I won't say negotiate, but have a strong relationship with about 150 people within your network, right? And Facebook has proven this in their neural networks as well. Looking at your Facebook friend list, it's about 150 people, so it's a pretty accurate number. And we look at people around the world. I'll give you an example of the Middle East. My wife is Kuwaiti Iraqi, Middle Eastern descent. I'm former Yugoslavian descent. That side is Turkish, and people convolute a lot of time Islam and Middle East. I'm like,
Yeah, for sure. That's messed up. Yeah.
it's messed up. But what people really don't realize, like a lot of this fucking strife in Middle East is all tribal honor system.
Yeah.
It predates Islam. Most people don't give a flying fuck about that.
Yeah.
It's literally honor system. My family versus your family. It's like very, very high honor. And so it's very, and the reason why I'm bringing us back to city states is like the more of a game theoretical model you build in the world, the better options people have. And I'll give you an example. Imagine in Canada, we had city states where Toronto was allowed to create their own taxation, our own economic policies, anything we want. And no province can't come in. Montreal can do the same thing. Alberta can do the same thing. Okay. You talk about the military. In this essence, the city states will create a federation. The federation pays towards a generalized military. But even still, each type of city states has their own independent military.
So does the city state have like small vassal states? Like what do you do with the countryside and stuff?
Like give me an example. Like
so if you have Toronto,
yeah,
right? What do you do with like I don't know, what's a small town near Toronto? Like what do you do with those?
Like Barrie, they're a city state as well.
So every town is a city state?
Technically, you could be, yeah. But the people think it's going to go back to fighting. Like the new form of fighting is not, it's not warfare as we traditionally think it's warfare. It doesn't pay that well anymore. It's going to be economic warfare. And so Switzerland's a good example of a semi-city state type of nation where each city state, or in this case, they're called cantons, they compete on taxation laws.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you an example. You live around Montreal. Near Montreal is Sherbourne, right? So let's say Sherbourne all of a sudden is like, all right, guys, we have no income tax in Sherbourne. I don't know about you, but if I was living in Montreal and Sherbourne comes around and says there's no income tax, I'm moving to Sherbourne.
Yeah.
Right. So they're going to create, and you create competition in nature. It's not survival of who's smartest. It's not the survival of who's the strongest. It's the survival of who's the most adapted towards the environment.
And so so like Switzerland doesn't have really, well, they have a military, but barely. Like they're not, they're the most armed citizens in the world per capita. Right. They all have guns. That's for sure. Yeah,
and they're all mandatory military at the age of 18.
Yeah. I mean, right? It's an interesting idea. I mean, Switzerland is an example of a place where that has at least worked until now from the Middle Ages. It also in their case, it's quite an old, and they're able to hold together, like people of Italian descent, German, French, and also Protestants and Catholics, and they've been able to kind of surf through until now. I've never really studied Switzerland. It'd be interesting to see how they manage, how they've been able to kind of get through this.
Yeah, and like, well, I want to relate it back to like religion in a nutshell. Is like, you're never going to have a global religion.
You wouldn't want a global religion either.
No. Yeah. And so looking at nations, and as far as I can see, nation states will stay here for a very long time. But my long-term thesis, whether it's 500 years or 100 years or 300 years, I slowly believe that nation states will deteriorate in power. They'll play in a proximity type of way. They'll technically exist, but they won't have the power as they have today. And we're going to go to that city states. We're going to have to create environments where religions will need to adapt to technology. And the reason why I keep on saying religion needs to adopt to technology, we're heading to a place where human beings will have the ability to genetically modify their DNA. We're heading to a period where, like you talk about the Catholic Church, when a sperm hits the egg, that's it. That's life, right? Their definition, right? So
Yep.
no abortion, that's life. As soon as
Yep.
sperm attaches to egg,
Yep.
that's a definition there. Okay, sure, that's their take. Then how do we then explain when a baby is born 100% outside of a womb, which
Yeah.
is going to happen, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like
Yeah.
technology is
No,
going to
but okay. So let's take your example. Like the thing is
yeah,
that let's take the symbolic. Like if I take the symbolic structure, the technology isn't neutral.
no,
Technology is not a neutral thing in terms of meaning and what it does to society. And so as you create this technological society, you are also ultimately you are inevitably going to create a society that is more and more sterile. It's just inevitable. It just works that way. And so as you come to creating, let's say, children that are raised in bags or genetically modified children, it's like you might have that possibility. Like you might be able to do that. And especially you'll be able to do it if you've lost a higher purpose and you don't even know why you're doing it. You're just doing it because you can, or you can make money or whatever. So you're kind of creating these kind of hybrids and genetically modified whatever and monsters and whatever. Like you're doing all this stuff.
mm-hmm.
Now imagine then in that case, like in that situation, you have societies that don't do that and have children and have family and have something which transcends, which they all look towards in order to unify them. It's like that society is going to win. It's going to win in the end. There's no way around it, dude.
if it's an open society that allows anybody to be themselves, because this is a reason people go to North America. There's a reason my parents fled Yugoslavia to come to Canada.
No,
they didn't go to Russia. They didn't go to China.
Yeah.
They're communist allies. They said, no.
Yeah.
I'm off to fucking North America.
No, I agree. I mean, I understand the appeal of North America. I understand the appeal of capitalism.
It's not even capitalism. It's capitalism, but it's the fact that they can practice their religion. You can have a Muslim, Jew, Christian, Hindu, whatever over here on the same roof doing whatever. And by constitutional right, they have that. You don't have that in many places in the world.
No, I agree. And it has certain advantages, but it also has certain disadvantages. And those disadvantages are already starting to play themselves out. Because the reality is that ours, like you said, rich societies have less children. They just do. And in the end, demography wins. Like demography you can't stop it. Like if you kind of believe in just normal evolutionary thing, it's like that's the thing that's just always never going to go away. It's just always.
So I have a thesis on this.
Go for it.
Demography always wins, and we need demography. We need more birth rate. I think people don't understand. We actually have an issue with birth rate. We need more human beings. The reason why we need more human beings, we need them to pay forward for the future of everybody. So,
right. Yeah.
In a nutshell, right?
Yeah.
And it's scary. Like, for example, you look at China and through their, it's called
the one-child system,
which is not non-existent anymore.
Right.
Their version of their communist / capitalism, they got about 100 million Chinese out of poverty into middle class, like a higher upper middle class. And think about this. You have a nation of 1.2 billion people. Their birth rate last year was 18 million. It's very low. You look at global birth rates, they're on decline. In fact, Jack Ma and Elon Musk were on a panel a couple of months ago, and they both agree on this. Like one of the biggest threats is the human birth rate, because it's not just the fact of we need more people for the future. It's like we also need people for catastrophic events. So statistically speaking, we're overdue. It's not if it's going to happen, when it's going to happen.
Oh, yeah, when, for sure.
Yeah, so something's going to happen. It can be a virus outbreak. It can be I don't know. Something's going to happen.
Yeah.
And you got 1/3 of the human population wiped out.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I agree with you 100%. The nations that have the most birth rate will have the most upside of a nation. And classic example in Africa is Nigeria. They have the highest birth rate. Like I think it's like 4, on average 3.8 or 4 kids per family compared to all the other African nations. And they're one of the fastest growing GDP economies within Africa. A lot of money being pumped into Nigeria. I think everything's cyclical. I think Everything happens. Like you look at the symbol of the Ouroboros, right? The snake eating its own tail, one of the oldest symbols in human species. It's like,
But like if you take your story, like if you take our situation, there's a story in the Bible which talks about, people don't totally realize that it talks about our time now, but in the Bible there's a cycle. It starts at creation and it ends at the flood. It's like a world. It's like a little world, right? So you have a creation of a world, and then you have the end of the world where the waters of chaos come in and swallow everything up, right? So if you want to think of the Ouroboros, that's it. That's the place where the head eats the tail, where nothing makes sense anymore, where all order breaks apart. Now, if you look at in the Bible, you actually see that as the fall happens, Cain, the bad son, he creates cities. He's the first one to make a city. And then his descendants develop technologies. And the technologies lead to war. But they also lead to strange mixtures between, like angels and men. Like, it doesn't matter what that means. What it means is that there's a confusion. There's this confusion. And so when you talk about like genetically modifying humans and all this stuff, like it's all there, like it's all in that story. And the idea of genetically modifying humans is, there are stories about that, and it's all the stories of monsters. Monsters are sterile. Monsters are always sterile. And the fact that our society is sterile, and that we also are thinking of creating monstrous humans, of genetically modifying them, and people are already doing it. Obviously, it's not like it's not happening. It's just because we don't know about it. That leads to collapse. It leads to a collapse because, like I said, the fact that the story is already there, it's been told before, and now we're just seeing a bigger version of it, like a bigger cycle. Well, we'll see. We'll see how it plays out.
I have a hypothetical
go for it,
or a question to ask you based on this Okay, so I mentioned earlier that our modern day 3 major Abrahamic religions are fairly new in the whole grand scheme of things. Okay.
But let me just caveat that.
All right.
That even though they're fairly new, we don't have access to much else.
This takes me to my question.
Right. Okay. The only thing that's really older than our 3 Abrahamic religions maybe is Hinduism.
Yeah. Which is fascinating, man. The stories in Hinduism is crazy.
Yeah, very interesting.
Okay, so I agree with Sam Harris on this take. I believe if we as a human species don't fuck ourselves in the next 100 years, we should be good. I think the next 100 years is very important for us. Okay, so I'm an optimist. We passed 100 years. Yeah. Okay, now we're in the future. I don't care about colonization of Mars. I think it's cool. I don't give a shit about it. I think it's a cool, like, plan B. If shit hits the fan, maybe Earth gets hit by a crazy meteorite, we'll at least have Mars or some other planet. I think no matter what, we're going to be intergalactic. Now, my question, though, is this. Fast forward 1,000 years from now. Do you see new religions being created or evolving that have the same, let's say, stronghold or impact as we saw these 3 major religions?
Not in this cycle, not in this massive, huge historical cycle. No, for sure not. I think that this big story is ultimately going to, in all let's say all religions, Islam and Christianity and Judaism, but then even in Hinduism, all have an eschatological vision. Right? They all have a vision that what we have now is not the totality of what is there.
Yes.
And that what we have is like looking in a mirror. St. Paul talks about, like, it's as if I'm looking in the mirror, then in the eschatological moment, I will see things completely. And so there is a sense in which that all of this is going to lead to something, to some totality. And so I agree. I do think that, but I think that there's definitely going to be a major crisis before that happens, like major crisis. And I don't think it's going to be very pleasant.
You're talking about like a global
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
like some kind of breakdown. There. I don't see it. I don't see. The thing is that you can't. The idea that you can just accumulate things is just not doesn't work that way. You can't just accumulate things. That for the same reason that you need to sleep, a society, civilizations also need to sleep. You can't. Every level of reality has the same pattern, and so you can't just think that we're just going to keep progressing. It doesn't work that way. The reality just doesn't work that way. And the idea also that technology is the solution is not true. It's just not true, because technology is actually just more and more power. But if you have more and more power and less wisdom, you're just going to run right into a wall. The very fact that our society is willing to do things like create nuclear weapons, the very fact that our society is capable of doing of having creating things which cause mass addictions, whether electronics or drugs or pornography or whatever, like whether or not the very fact that we're willing to do that shows us that we're adding more technology or more knowledge of how the brain works is just not going to save us. It's actually going to make it all worse, because it's just more power. It's like you're giving a child, if I just give a child more power, then that child is going to solve its problems. Like maybe that child's going to use that power to just to kill everybody. It's like there's a Twilight Zone episode where it's like this child who has unlimited power. And if have you ever seen that?
I know the series. Yeah,
yeah, it's a classic episode where it's a child that has unlimited power. And it's like he doesn't have the wisdom to use that unlimited power. And so he uses it in all these disturbing, perverse ways. And so, it's like, is social media good for us? Like, is Twitter good for us? Seems not, but
it's a tool, though. It's a tool. So so one of the famous quotes from the biologist Owen E. Wilson, he states, "We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and God-like technologies. Are the very nature of the Homo sapien, or the human itself, it needs a very long time to adapt to all these technologies. These technologies are piggybacking off of very ancient pathways in our body, piggybacking off our dopamine, our serotonin, all these addiction pathways, and utilizing it. It's a pre-existing pathways. The thing is technology is innate. It's just an object. We haven't had enough of a time span to look back in hindsight and realize, oh, this is fucked up, that's fucked up, that's fucked up. We're slowly now coming to realize that social media, it's not healthy for us. Screen time is not healthy for us. And so it's on to us as individuals to educate ourselves, not expect the government or some kind of other entity to tell us that if it's good or bad, and to educate our kids or educate our community. I'm like, listen, this thing over here, like I wouldn't have my business if it wasn't for this. But at the exact same time, it's very addictive.
Yeah.
And so we have to, like a gun, people say guns are evil. I'm like, what is a gun by itself? No, it's a human being behind the gun that shoots somebody else. That individual has psychological issues, and we have to deal with the psychological problem, not the innate object itself. And so I think, there's a Buddhist saying, it is as it should be. You mentioned we can't just change things in real time. Eventually, when the process happens, we're going to revert backwards and realize, well, this is what we have to do now.
I mean, I'm happy that you have that optimism. What I'm seeing is that we have, in the past few hundred years, we have as technology has developed, it's not just that technology has developed, is that we have poo-pooed our wisdom traditions. We have mocked those that have brought wisdom. We've mocked our sages. We've mocked our saints. We've mocked all the things that it was there to guide us in terms of how to live our lives. And so if it was true, like I mean, I don't think it's possible, because I think there's an actual pattern to this. It's not arbitrary, like I said.
Oh no, 100% there's a pattern to this.
There's so one of the patterns that I talk about is the pattern of the garments of skin. Like that's what I call it, because it's when Adam and Eve fell, God gave them garments of skin, and these garments of skin are covering. So it's like you're lacking, you're missing something, because you're moving out of your home, you're outside, you need to be covered, right? So you wear this garments of skin. And then a city is the same thing. And all technology ends up being these garments of skin that we add to our nature in order to make us more powerful. But every time you make something more powerful, you always make it weaker at the same time. You cannot avoid it. For the same reason that I can start a fire like this by flicking a match, but if I didn't have my book of matches, I would be in serious trouble because I don't know how to start a fire. My great grandparents did. It took them 20 minutes to start a fire, but they could do it just with a stick and a rope, you know?
Yeah.
So there's an inevitability of this. Like as our world complexifies, and if there's a disaster, like if there's a disaster right now, like a real disaster, we will lose everything.
And
you think all these bits, you think all these like memory chips, all these bits and that are out there in wires and in servers are going to survive?
This is why I'm very optimistic. Like people don't realize we as a human species have gone through so much more shit than any of the world wars at all. Like there's one theory, and it's a theory, not even a hypothesis. At one point, I forget what it was called, but the human species dwindled down to only 50,000 people on this planet. And here we are, like what, 6-7 billion people. We've gone through tremendous experiences as human beings, right?
But I totally agree with you. Like the image, like I always tell people, the last image in the Bible, the last image is the image of the heavenly Jerusalem. That is, it's the image of the city. The city, you can use the city as a stand-in for all human activity, all technology, all of that. And then all of a sudden, this city is a perfect city. But it's a glorious city made of precious stones, and it's a perfect cube, and it's like this perfect image. And so there is a possibility. I don't think it's impossible that our technology can be transfigured and can be transformed for the better of our human species. But to be honest, it's like I don't think this is an inevitable thing. And I don't think that it's going to come by more technology. It's not going to come by more technology. It's going to come by rediscovering our wisdom, like rediscovering purpose and rediscovering why we, rediscovering the deep truth, the deep mystical truth. Then that might transfigure technology. But learning how to increase your mental capacity with an implant, dude, that's not going to do anything. It's going to make you a more powerful evil genius. It's not going to make you a better person, anyways, Brainiac is not, Brainiac is very powerful, but he's not a good person.
No, I think you're also like, you're talking a lot about what might people say like an Elysium type of society, where there's one group of people that chooses to be in a technocratic type of society, and a second group of people that might choose a more like simpler type of like village type of lifestyle. Which is totally plausible. But how I see it is, I view it from like Rene Girard's mimetic theory. Monkey see, monkey do. There's a tipping point, boiling point, a scapegoat. Some shit hits the fan, shit blows up. Okay, cool. We've cleansed ourselves of our sins, and now we're starting over. Now, it can be another world war. Now, as we know it, it can be economic war. It can be a viral breakout. It can be so many different things. And if you look, though, at the lineage, even though you're saying we're in a bad position. Yes. But if I elongate history right now, and I look at how my grandmother lived and I lived, I'm fucking lucky I live now.
Oh yeah.
My grandmother lived.
Yeah.
Like, back in the day, the average lifespan was 45 or 47. I don't want to live till 47. The average lifespan right now is 87, right?
Yeah. Science it depends, amazing. Though. It's like I'd rather live until 47 with a purpose in life than live until 90 sitting on a couch, and playing video games.
That's to say if they had a purpose. I have no idea, right? But I agree. You shouldn't just be sitting down. But eventually what I'm saying is this. You got technology. You got crazy people running countries. We're still running as like apes, pre-programmed, and conflict happens. Shit hits the fan. We learn from it. We get a little bit better. So we got to elongate the time span a lot because we've only been here for kind of like a speck in the whole grand scheme of things. So we got to look like a couple thousand years, and we're like, hopefully by that time it's like things are good.
To be totally, I mean, I understand that position. It's like the Steven Pinker position. I'm not a big fan of that. Not a big fan because I don't think that. I think that there are certain things that have trade-offs. That there are trade-offs that you just can't. That you can't help. So you can't at the same time have a technocratic society and have a wisdom society. You just can't. Like at least not if you put all your energy on the technocratic side. Like if you do that, then you're going to have to, you have a limited amount of energy. Some things are in a balance and you can't have both, and there's a reason why religious traditions have ascetic practices. Like that, the fact of actually peeling back these garments, peeling back these exteriors is actually a way to center yourself, to enter into something which is aligned and which will help you see purpose and to see the bigger picture. But then that's actually, you get stories in the Bible of like whole cities mourning, like everybody's mourning in the city and everybody is fasting and all this stuff, like maybe we would need something like that. That's not going to happen. Like, it's not going to happen. Well, people are trying to come up with their own thing. What do they call it? Was it like all these sober November, whatever, sober October, whatever? Like they inevitably will come back to it because it's like a natural thing to want to do that. But they only want to do it for health purpose. They don't have this idea that you're going to find some kind of insight into your life by stripping back some of this excess.
Is once again what I said, where like, if people are the problem with modern religion, and I won't even relate to the Vatican, I relate it to, like, let's say their local church or mosque, whatever temple you go to. What can I call them? Like, well, in Islam is a mom, and then there's a father. I don't know. You could call it the whole priest. Yeah, let's call him priest. Yeah, okay. So you got the priest inside this temple, and the priest is usually kind of like the person guiding you, right? Okay. They need to update. Like, if they had better communication and better updating for like modern times, people will listen to them more. And it's like, maybe it's my marketing mind thinking,
like if they use apps and
not even apps, like better communication, man. It's like none of this, like you can take old ideologies and beliefs and update it to the new time and create better. Because at the end of the day, what you want a healthier, better, and happier family unit. More better and happier family units create a better society. A better society becomes a richer society. Like it works up from the grassroots.
Yeah. But what we need is not better communication. What we need are saints. But we need our holy people. Like you said before, we need our people who take it seriously, people who act, in good faith, people who are trying to look at themselves, transform themselves first, remove the splinter from their eye, all of the things that Christ told us to do. That's the key. That's the solution.
That's my favorite quote in the Bible, Matthew 7.
Yeah. That's what we need to do, and so that's the real solution is that, and the only way to go about it is that you have to do it. Like I have to do it, not you. Like I have to do that. Like I have to be that. And if I'm that, then Christ talks about it. If you become a tree, then the birds come to sit in your branches. Like if you're transformed as a person, this great quote by Saint Seraphim of Sarov, who says, "Acquire the spirit of peace, and 1,000 around you will be saved." It's like if you yourself get transformed, then the world will be transformed.
I think this message is generally in most practice. Like you look at Sufi like Rumi, he has a famous thing. Yesterday I was clever, I want to change the world. Today I'm wise, I want to change myself.
You're right.
So I think the message, you just got to get the message to people where it's like, yeah, your temple may help you, but the truth isn't out there. The truth's in you. You got to work on yourself. You got to take responsibility for yourself.
Yeah, but part of that is submitting to something higher than you. Part of it is because one of the biggest obstacle to transforming yourself is pride. Like that's the biggest obstacle, is to think that I got it, I got this, I'm in charge, I'm doing this, all of that. And one of the reasons why we have churches, one of the reasons why we have spiritual hierarchies is so that you have someone above you who can tell you, dude, you're off. Like this isn't right. You're not doing it right. And just that, even just accepting to submit yourself to something higher is already part of the transformation. That's why we have that, because we delude ourselves. And you meet people all the time. You meet some person who's spiritual, and is doing yoga classes and meditation and everything, and their life is in complete shambles. Like their relationships are horrible. They've just gotten a divorce. They're fighting for their kids. It's like, my goodness, dude, like that spiritual stuff, like it's not helping you, my friend. It's no good.
Not for him, but then some other people that does help. I think it's all case dependent, right?
Yeah. Well, Yeah, maybe.
Like even for myself, like what do I define myself as? I don't believe in capital
So
R, but
what did you grow up as? You said you're from
nothing
Yugoslavia.
really. These
Were you
communists, it's fucking atheism.
right? Yeah, atheism. Hmm.
Like you can't practice. It's by law. You couldn't practice. Like
Yeah.
in a nutshell, my family background is a mixture of like Islam and Orthodox Christianity from the
Hmm.
Balkans.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's
You're just
non-practicing.
atheistic. Yeah, 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 yeah.
It's not like you're atheist by label. You don't.
Yeah.
It's just like one, by law you couldn't practice, like
Yeah. Yeah.
China,
Yeah.
right? And two, it's just like it's more cultural than anything.
Mm.
It's like cultural beliefs as opposed to like, let's say, like religious beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like for me, it's like I'm not like I get what you're saying, but like I'm not guided by the Holy Spirit or something like that. But I'm guided by like how do I become a better me, a better husband, a better partner, a better business person? How do I help people around me? How do I create a better community?
Yeah.
Like stuff like that. Like I think there's ways of hybridizing that as opposed to like I need to have somebody telling me what to do.
Well, it's good to have a mix of both.
You know?
It's because we delude ourselves. Well, I mean, you can always pay for the shrink to do that for you. Like people
I
do
take my own
that.
shrink. I pop 5 grams of mushrooms and I sit down and
Oh man. I mean, yeah, it's like I understand that's the world we're in. Like what you're saying is the world we're in, and and also to a certain extent, the fact that the church has been corrupt, and the fact that we've seen all these horrible stories come out in the past years. It's a sad state. Like it's a sad situation. But there's something about. I mean, there's something about talking to someone else, as someone, especially someone that does have some kind of power over you.
well, I think what you're referring to is role models, man. Like case example, which is a lot of
Yeah.
it's missing a lot within boys and men. Like you have absentee fathers. Like
Mm.
for me, my dad was wasn't absentee, but he was like a piece of furniture.
Yeah.
There, but not there, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously, how's my mom going to control me? I was a fucking nutcase as a child. I'm like my mom's not going to control me. Bless her
Yeah.
soul.
Yeah.
But like if you have like proper role model, not someone telling you, well, Jonathan, this is what you must do, and if you don't listen to me, you're gonna go. None of that bullshit. But more or less being a friend, showing them example, and above all, not having a hypocrisy.
Yeah. I
Where people
understand.
say one thing,
Yeah.
but the actions speak another thing. Like live by example.
Yeah. No, I agree. And that's why, and it's like I said, what we need to a certain extent are saints, even if it's like a little s saints, like little s saints. But when you do get like a capital S saint, you have transformations. Like when there is someone who is authentic and real and living it out and not being a hypocrite, you can.
Is there an example of somebody in recent times that you would kind of put in that category?
Yeah, there are definitely. I mean, because I'm in the Orthodox Church, there are several elders in Mount Athos who command great respect and who have people who go and get their wisdom and then are able to spread that wisdom around. There's quite a few of those. We have several saints, even some Serbian saints who were in America and who had some great effect and who kind of gave the tone for the church. And so there are people, but there are very few. That's true. And and I think the fact that there are so few is why everything's so messed up. Like we just look around and it's sad. It's kind of sad. So I understand your frustration with big R religion. But at the same time, I don't buy your alternative.
I don't have an alternative. I'm just here doing me.
Yeah.
I'm not selling anything to anybody.
He's like, I'm not. Yeah, well,
listen. I go by the golden rule. I'm a simpleton. I'm like,
yeah,
work on yourself, treat others how you want to be treated. Do good in the world. And I always say, like, focus on the primal things that makes a human being. Work out, be in physical shape because physical shape will dictate mental shape. Work on your mental health, right? And all these things are interconnected, right? When you feel good, you do good. And so it's like, at least like focusing on the base, and you can relate the basics. Like these simple things are much easier. Like I'm a firm believer in having a stepping stone and an inception to helping people. Because let's say you're talking to a 17-year-old, and I work with a lot of young kids, and you start talking about religion, forget about it, right? And I'm not coming from a religious perspective, but if you're talking about, hey man, like, I know what you want. I know you want to make money in the future. I know you want to live a good life, but this is how you do it. Like, take care of yourself, treat people right. Like, and obviously have guidance too. Is like, don't just go out with every single girl and just get a girl pregnant. Being like very like, I'm not talking about complicated fucking things over here.
Yeah.
Like, you would think that people would have this. And I didn't have any of this mentorship or guidance when I was younger. I had to learn everything myself through mistakes, right? No one sat me down. No one gave me this, like, you're a good father, and I think your kid is blessed to have you. Is like, no one sat me down to have this. And I think a lot of this, like, just very basic stuff, is like having a good family structure, having a good community to relate to, having somebody to talk to, having some role models to look at. Like, fuck.
So where, like, for example, like your community, like where does it come from?
If I had to say, it would be the entrepreneurial community.
Okay.
Yeah. But then, like, you look at their behaviors, it aligns to, like, a lot of responsibility. They got to take care of everybody. They have two families. They have their family, which is their business, and their platonic family, right? They got to take care of their health. They got to take care of their mentality. They got to take care of their finances. So to be a successful entrepreneur, like, it takes a lot of these building blocks already to be to that level.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But I think we'll wrap it up that. If people want to get to know more about you and everything and all the work you do, what's the best resource for them?
Well, I mean, it's in terms of my speaking, it's really the YouTube channel. You can look me up, Jonathan Pageau, on YouTube, or the symbolicworld.com. That's my website. Usually all of my videos come out on that as well. I also am a artist. I make religious art, and people can check out my website, Pageau Carvings. That's usually the best place to find me.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching. And also, if you're listening to this on iTunes, please leave a review and go check out Jonathan's stuff. I will leave a link in the show notes to his carving. Check out his carvings. They're pretty cool. I'm going to buy one. They look
well,
cool.
thanks for your, how can I say this? I know we're on two different sides of a question, and I really appreciate the generosity with which you engage with me. So thanks a lot.
Likewise. All the best.
All right. All the best.